Hi there. I just want to talk about my school days because I went to my secondary school, started in 1960, finished in 1965. So I had 6 years of secondary school because I was basically a high school dropout, had 3 goes at what we call school certificate. In those days, you had to get 200 credits or 200 points, and even if you passed one paper or even 2 subjects, if you didn't get the 200, you had to start all over again, and you didn't get those subjects credited to you even though you passed them, and so you had to do the whole lot again. And of course in later years what they did, they changed the rules a wee bit, and those ones that if you passed the subject, then you had that credited to you, so that the next year, if you passed a couple more and you got to your 200 points, then you got through. And but that was, I reckon that was a deliberate thing, that only 50% of all students could actually be able to pass school certificate, because that's the way the government wanted it. They didn't want everybody to pass, and so what they did, that even if the marks were actually skewed towards more people passing than the 50%, what they did was to re-skew the marks, fit it into the proper bell curve, that even if people actually passed, got their 200 points in the raw scores, their scores were downgraded so that they actually failed, which I felt was a very unfair system. But that was the way that's the way the school system went in those days, in the 1960s. Also, the secondary school system in the 1960s, in New Zealand anyway, in small town New Zealand, was based on the Victorian system, where every little infraction was disciplined by the cane. And so, I believe that corporal punishment sometimes is applicable to really quite serious offences, although these days it's against the law to whack a kid on the backside with a stick, but in those days it wasn't. But the problem was that the cane was used for every little offence. So if you had your socks down, if you didn't have your socks up near the knees and you had your socks down, you got caned. If you didn't have your kin book in assembly, you got caned. If you didn't have your cap on when you're out and about, you got caned. So every little offence. And so for a lot of kids, it just became meaningless. We had kids had notches on their belt. It was like a gunfighter having notches on the butt of his revolver. It was a thing of pride to have plenty of notches on your belt of how many times you got caned, and it takes away the whole point of the discipline. And also, I just doubt with some teachers, that whether they got a pleasure at whacking little boys on the bum with a piece of wood, with a stick. However, that's what it was. The other thing that I would say about those days was prefect system. The prefect system is a Victorian system, and what happened was you had about 10 boys, senior boys, who were elected as prefects, and they kept the others in line. The problem is that some of those prefects were just plain bullies, and they used their prefect badges to bully. And there was one prefect that I knew of in my last year of school. He was proud of the fact that he could bully third formers, terrorise third formers, which I felt was just monstrous, really. I found out that guy had actually become a member of the church in a couple of years after that, and he then felt really ashamed that he did that and bullied, and wished he'd never done it. But there are others who didn't care, and they just got sort of some pleasure out of bullying third formers. And I think it's not very good for a third former to come into a secondary school for the first time in its all strange environment, to have this sixth or seventh form prefect just bully them for the pleasure, sadistic pleasure of bullying another person. I think that's shameful, and it's a pity that the leadership of the school, the principal and the senior leadership of the school, didn't take that prefect's badge off the guy that did the bullying. But then again, that school wasn't very good at dealing with bullying at all, and kids just got bullied, and there's nothing anybody could do about it. And that's the problem with, I don't know about other, I think in a lot of schools that I've heard of in UK and in America, as well as New Zealand and Australia, bullying is a terrible problem. And when I was teaching in a secondary school, after I became trained later in life, I found that bullying was still a problem, and there was bullying between teachers as well. And I was a subject to that, and a victim of that, and it wasn't very pleasant at all. And there's nothing anybody could do about it. And bullying is a terrible epidemic in secondary schools, and something needs to be done about it. But what do you do about it? I don't know what you can do about it. However, I found that the teachers, I was a B student, not an A student, but I was a B student in the school, and I found that they never really taught you how to learn. It was only after I became a primary school teacher in the 1990s, was it 2000, late 1990s, that I just learned how to actually write an essay. And I'd already done an MA in English literature, and it was only after that I learned the building blocks of actually learning and writing an essay, how to build an essay up from making notes. It was a paper I did at university. It was a directed study on writing a paper, and they took you through all the steps of scholarship to do that, and it was a great experience, and I learned a lot through it. And I put that into practice when I was teaching kids how to write essays, how to mind map, how to, for older ones, they could do research notes. And so when I did my Master of Divinities in my 60s, and I had to do a research paper, then I learned to get a bibliography together, read the books, do the research notes, put it all together, write the paper. It was about a 50 to 60 page paper, and I got a really good grade for it, really high grade for it. So, I used to often think when I was at secondary school, this is supposed to be a learning place, not a place where you're afraid to come to school because you're afraid of doing some sort of minor infraction and getting whacked on the bum with a stick for it. And it just puts you off learning. What do we go to school for? We go to school to learn, to improve our education, and to get a vocation in life. Not to go to school to be bullied by teachers and prefects who wield a stick to hit you on the backside every time you did something wrong. I don't agree with that at all. And it shows about the bullying problem, because my daughter was bullied at her secondary school. And I went there and I got confronted by the principal and the first assistant and the counsellor, and they basically blamed me for bringing it up. They blamed her for being bullied. And I thought, well, that's a bit stupid. So we got her out of that school into a much better one, where she wasn't bullied. And that was better. But my daughter suffered the consequences of that in her life. Because when you're bullied, it has an effect on a person, and can cause clinical depression, which we knew that's what would happen. The other good thing about our secondary school, which doesn't happen these days, is the fact that we had school cadets, and this was army training, and come out of the Second World War, of course, and we had army training, and if a kid wanted to be an NCO, go up through the ranks, and went to Burnham Military Camp in Christchurch for 2 weeks during the holidays and did the course. And you had a junior NCO course and a senior NCO course, and that was good. I enjoyed that. And after 6 years of doing school cadets and a junior NCO course and a senior NCO course, then when I joined the Air Force, after I left school to train as a civil aviation communicator, we had to do a year in the Air Force to do that. I came first in our recruit course because I had 6 years of experience at school cadets, learned how to use firearms, learned how to take a Bren gun to pieces and put it back together again, and learned all the things about being a soldier. And probably could have done well if I'd gone into the army, but I didn't want to go into the army, and I didn't want to really stay in the Air Force. There's no privacy there, and everything is open for all to see, and I'm a private person. I'd rather be private about it. But I enjoyed the school cadets, and the thing about school cadets, when a student becomes an NCO and has a little bit of authority, they learn to use it right, and it's good to actually teach young people a sense of responsibility, and having right sort of authority over people, not using their rank to bully people, but to have learn how to use authority in the right way. And that was good in school cadets. And I joined the Air Training Corps as a student for a little while, and that was quite good. That sort of gave me a little bit of an introduction into what the Air Force was going to be like, and I had my year in the Air Force, which was an experience all of its own. Anyway, that's my video about schooling in the 1960s. It's quite different now though, and but I feel that in these days, in the years beyond 1960s, I feel that students have become more rebellious. Very hard to be a teacher these days. I wouldn't do it again. If I'd known what I was going to experience being a school teacher, I would have done something else. And if anybody's considering being a school teacher in an ordinary secondary school these days, make sure you got a real calling for it. Because if you don't have a real calling for it and you're just doing it as a job, then for goodness sake, do something else. Put better use of your training and years of training. I spent 3 years training for a Teachers College diploma and a BA in English, and then I went on to do an MA in English. And if I'd have known what I know now about teaching, I wouldn't ever have gone teaching. I would have done something much more productive in my life. But anyway, that I had 19 years of school teaching, and I made a lot of friends among the students and teachers. I won't talk about some of the principals I've had to work with, and some of the other, and being bullied in my first year of teaching by some bag that didn't want a male typing teacher in her department. Actually, that was the part I enjoyed most, was teaching typing, and because I'm a touch typist, because I learnt that in the civil aviation, teleprinting, and that was my most enjoyable years of teaching, when I taught typing to secondary school kids. Anyway, that's my video, and I hope that you enjoy listening to my ramblings.